Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you. My name is Nathan Hoag. I get to be the pastor of the Sacred Grace Inglewood, which is one of your sister churches. At the end of this month, our church is celebrating our 3rd anniversary, which is very exciting. Thank you very much. Phil had his doubts, but here we are, 3 years later. And really just to prove him wrong. I don't even care. I'm just trying to make sure that he's wrong in all of this, so it doesn't really matter. I'm just kidding. I love our church. Thanks. We're really excited to celebrate that. We're excited that we get to be in a partnership with you, and I get to come here, and Phil this coming Sunday will be at our church teaching, and we're really excited to have that relationship and partnership. This past week, some friends of ours were up in Wyoming, and they were driving back to Missouri, and they were going to take a detour through Denver to spend a couple hours with us in the afternoon on their way back. But the day that they were driving was Wednesday, and Wednesday there was a bomb cyclone. I don't know if you heard about that. That was terrifying, mostly just the name. The storm was scary too, but the name was scarier. And so they stayed the night because there was really no going anywhere by the time they got down here, which was great. We actually got to spend some really good quality time with them, and we really enjoyed that. But at one point in time, we're all hanging out, and one of our friends takes a phone call, and she's sitting on our couch while she's on the phone call, and she's on the phone call for quite some time. She looks pretty concerned. She's from Venezuela. She's speaking entirely in Spanish, very fast. I'm not catching anything. I'm listening to her phone call, trying to catch something, and I'm catching almost nothing. And she looks very concerned. She's on the phone for a long time, and after she gets off the phone, she comes in the kitchen. I said, "Hey, is everything okay? You seemed concerned. That seemed to be troublesome, whatever that was." And she said, "Yeah, that's the first time in over a week I've been able to speak with my family." Because in Venezuela, there's been a power outage, and there has been a food shortage, and there has been a tremendous amount of turmoil. And I started to ask her what that's like. Like, what's it like to grow up in an environment like that? What's it like to have family there in an environment like that? And she began to tell me about the intersection of socialism and poverty, and how when poverty and socialism intersect, one of the first things to go is choice. So when you go to the grocery store in Venezuela, you buy whatever food is there. You don't choose, you just buy calories because that's what you and your family need. When you go to the grocery store here, like at the King Soopers over here, there's an entire aisle for chips, like a whole aisle for chips. There's like 2 ways to make chips, but there's a whole aisle for chips, and there's a little sign hanging every like 5 feet that says chips, 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 and you can walk down and you have like user choice paralysis because there's so many chips to choose from, and we choose things here all the time. We get the choice constantly. You go to the hospital in Venezuela, and you don't choose the procedure that you have because there's really no supplies. Your bill's paid for, which is great, but you can't really choose the procedure you have. You have to choose whatever procedure they happen to have supplies for. Here, you're going to pay out the nose for a procedure, but you're going to basically be able to pick whatever procedure you want or need. We get to choose so much here that it's kind of seeped its way into our spirituality, our understanding of Christianity, the way we approach the Bible, the way we approach the teachings of Jesus. And if you read through the Sermon on the Plain, as we were doing throughout the season of Lent, you're going to get to parts that you love. Like last week, we talked about blessing, and everybody wants to hear about blessing. That's like a great thing to hear about, and that teaching from Jesus is always a fun one to listen to. And then the section right after, the section we're in tonight, is a warning. It's like a rebuke. It's a woe passage, if you will. It's something that we have to consider that's pretty heavy, actually. But we choose, and we skip over things. And tonight, I'm going to talk about the first of a few hard teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Plain. And it is in this passage, this very short passage, that Jesus presents to us a warning and even a rebuke. A rebuke is a correction or to criticize or to reprimand. And there's not a single person in this room that likes to receive correction, criticism, or being reprimanded. We just don't like it. It's a very human thing. It's a very normal thing. Nobody really likes to receive those things. We love to dish it out, right? Every single one of us sits in the jury box all day, every day. We get a tidbit of information from like next door or from a friend or a family member or the person we share a cubicle wall with, and we take that information and we analyze it to death, and then we pass down our judgment. We pass down our verdict, right? We love to do that. We pass down a verdict on a person or a country or a bill or a law or whatever it is. We love to judge, but we hate to be judged. None of us like rebuke. And that makes this passage that we're going to read in just a second difficult to receive. I chose Eugene Peterson's version of it. It's called The Message, because I think it actually gets to the heart better than some of the other translations of what this is really directed towards. It goes like this, from Luke chapter 6 starting in 24. It goes like this. But it's trouble ahead if you think that you've made it. What you have is all you'll ever get, and it's trouble ahead if you're satisfied with yourself. Yourself will not be satisfied for long. And there's trouble ahead if you think life's all fun and games. There's suffering to be met, and you're going to meet it. There's trouble ahead when you live only for the approval of others, saying what flatters them, doing what indulges them. Popularity contests are not truth contests. Look how many scoundrel preachers were approved by your ancestors. Your task is to be true, not popular. My first approach to this when I was writing this homily was to explain what it means, right? I mean, that's just a normal thing to do. You're like, okay, I'm going to talk in front of a bunch of people about this text. I should probably tell them what it means. But I wrote all that out, and I didn't like anything that I had written because I feel like we don't even really have the mechanism or the tool in our tool belt to receive a teaching like this, even if we know what it means. I myself have been struggling with this since I read it. And so I threw that out and I started over and I started writing about what it means to receive rebuke and what it means for you and I to receive criticism or feedback or being reprimanded in some way, because I just don't think we know how to do it. I just don't think that we're really very capable. We typically respond to rebuke in two ways. There are two major barriers to us receiving rebuke. The first response is defensive. Right? We hear rebuke or we hear correction. Somebody says something to us that we don't like, and we are defensive. We justify our actions. We're like, well, who is that person to say that thing about us? Well, who is that person to tell me what I should do with my relationships or my time or my money? Who is that person to tell me how to parent? Who is that person to tell me how to do my job? Who is that person, and what authority do they have? We flip the script on them, and we start to pass judgment on them and say they aren't worth anything, their opinion's not worth anything. That's our defensiveness. You probably didn't respond to Jesus' teaching that way because that's how we respond to other people. We respond to Jesus' teaching in a different way. Somebody who actually has the moral high ground, we tend to deflect. That's our response to people who have the actual moral high ground. We deflect. We read a passage like this, and we sit with it for a minute, and then we go, I wonder who this is about. Oh, yeah, I think I know. It's probably about that brother of mine in Idaho, right? Like, he needs to hear this, and so I'm going to send him the link to this podcast because this would be really good for him. Like, this would be something that he would really enjoy hearing. This would be helpful for him. It would sharpen him. This would be really good. Or I'm going to just copy and paste this into my Twitter feed, hashtag Jesus or rebuke or something like that, and just see who comes across it. I'm sure the right person will come by it, and it will go out there to the person who needs it. I don't know. It's not about me, but I'm sure it's about someone. I'm sure it's about somebody. We tend to be deflective. It's more likely that when I read this text, that's what you were thinking in your mind. A person that you know, or maybe an anonymous person, like someone out there needs to hear a warning like this. But that's what I love about Eugene's translation. He says, there's trouble ahead for you. There's trouble ahead for you, not the person next to you, not the person you share a cubicle wall with or a property line with, not the person who lives in your home with you or your parents. There's trouble ahead for you. It's a hard thing to sit with. Rebuke is not an easy thing for us to receive. There's several examples of Jesus rebuking actual specific people. He does this with the Pharisees a lot. He does it with his friends too. He rebukes Peter at one point in Matthew chapter 16. Peter comes at him and disagrees with him, and Jesus rips him and says, "Get behind me, Satan, because what you're saying is wrong and actually blasphemous." Jesus had predicted his own death and said, I need to die in order to fulfill this prophecy, and Peter did not like it at all, and Jesus did not like at all that Peter did not like what he had said. And so he rebukes him. And it would be really easy for that to be the end of the story. If Peter was not receptive to Jesus' rebuke, he would have walked, right? That would have been it. But he must have been somewhat receptive to Jesus' rebuke, because the passage right after that, Jesus pulls Peter, James, and John, his closest friends, aside, and he shows them more of who he is. He shows them his glory in a particular way. It said like his face was shining like the sun. It was called the Transfiguration, a really intimate moment, actually. And so for Peter to have been in that moment, he must have been receptive in the moment prior to that rebuke. But it's hard for us to do that, isn't it? It's hard for us to have our hands open and to receive a hard thing like there's trouble ahead for you. There are two things that I think are really important for us to consider when we are becoming more receptive to rebuke or correction or feedback really of any kind. And these are great things to be thinking about in the season of Lent, and Lent lends itself to these two things, so it comes at a good time. The two things are fasting and contemplation. By practicing fasting and contemplation, I think over time we become more receptive to rebuke. We become more receptive to correction. Let's start with fasting. Fasting is purposeful poverty. And I don't mean at all to say that somebody who is fasting knows what it's like to live in poverty. I don't think that's fair to people who are actually living in poverty. If you're living in poverty, that's disrespectful to you, and I don't mean to say that at all. What I'm trying to say is that fasting requires some level of discomfort, some level of purposeful discomfort, some level of chosen discomfort, where I fast from food, or I fast from television, or I fast from whatever it is you're choosing to fast from in the season of Lent, or maybe you haven't decided yet. Tonight's a good night to decide that. Whatever you choose to fast from will develop in you some level of discomfort. Discomfort leads to weakness, and weakness is the soil in which humility can grow. So fasting is this practice that develops in us humility, which allows us to receive correction. It allows us to receive things like Jesus' words here, there's trouble ahead for you. For the humble person, this is actually not that hard to receive. For a person like me, I was defensive and deflective when I read this the first time. I had a hard time with this and realized that humility needed to develop in me before I could really know what this means for me. The second thing is contemplation. Contemplation is a practice of rhythmic receptivity, a rhythm by which you open your hands and open your heart and say, what might God do in this space? Or what might this person do if you're doing some sort of communal contemplation? Or what do I, my objective self, if that even exists, what do I have to say to me? You practiced this just a few minutes ago as Brandy led us through a time of confession. There was a time of silence. It was empty space, which is kind of terrifying and really foreign. Can you think of any other time in your life where there's empty space like we experienced a few minutes ago? Nothing, right? It's not natural, at least. We have to choose it. We have to say, this is what I'm going to do during this time. We have to choose contemplation. It will never accidentally happen. It never really just comes our way. It's something we have to choose. In fasting, we develop humility. In contemplation, we develop an openness, a willingness to receive something. And I think these are two really important key things that not only do we practice throughout the season of Lent, but are absolutely necessary before we can receive any form of correction, any form of warning, any form of rebuke. If you came here tonight and you hoped that I would tell you exactly what this passage means, I'm sorry to disappoint, but that's not my intent tonight. I felt like we had to rewind back a little bit more and say, what sort of posture do I still need to have in order to receive something like this? I think that it is true of every person in this room, because I think it's true of human beings, that there is trouble ahead for you. And I think that it's really hard to receive that unless we're in a position of humility and openness wherein we can read something like that and know what it means. And so instead of ending with a really specific, clear concept here for you to take from this passage, I'm going to end with a question. What might there be ahead for you that would be troublesome? What sort of trouble might be ahead for you? And if you're looking for some more context around that, I would read this passage again. Maybe in another version, maybe in the same version. It might take the entire season of Lent to start to decipher what that means for you. I do think there's trouble ahead for you. And I think there's trouble ahead for me. And I intend to spend the remainder of the season hopefully in fasting and contemplation, learning to receive what this might mean. And that is also my hope for you. So as you go tonight, at the end of our service tonight, and as you go throughout your week and throughout the season of Lent, consider where you can experience fasting, a purposeful poverty, and contemplation, a rhythmic receptivity, to develop not only the humility that you need to be able to hear something like this, but the openness that you need in order to really receive it and keep it and learn from it and grow from it. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you for an opportunity again to gather and sing and to listen and to pray. I pray, God, that the message tonight to each of us would be customized in some way. And even if it's not tonight that it starts to make sense, I pray that sometime in this season, as we approach Easter and approach celebration, that we would have more times, more than just Tuesday nights, to stop and to contemplate, to stop in silence and in openness, to confess and then to receive correction from you. I pray that for this community. I pray that for our family of churches. that we would be characterized as those who are humble enough and open enough to receive correction, rebuke, even being reprimanded by those around us or by you. Pray these things in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.